I'm here today at Paul Gassman Gallery with Deborah Kass, and we're just going to have a little bit of conversation talking about her work. OMG, here we are. I was saying that I had read in your retrospective what Rob Storr had to say about you, which is, Rob Storr. Yeah. So Rob Storr said, "You'd have to have a tin ear and a leaden heart to resist your call to arms. You'd have to be blind not to see the warm, wry life force beneath her work's cool, detached Warholian surfaces." Is this great? This is...
I like that line too.
I know. So I wasn't going to start with this, but now that we're here and we're talking about, this series of paintings, it had been 12 years between your last show in New York, not
Yes.
your last show.
Well, it was my last one-person show.
Right.
Yeah.
And the show...
No, that's not true. I actually had a big traveling show somewhere in between there. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but when you opened with this whole new series, which you had stepped away from all the figuration completely from Warhol, and were still doing collaborations with artists, but in a totally different way, and they were all language-based work. It was such an incredible departure. Really bright colors, really fun, really, still heavy on content. But that was kind of a wonderful, it was a great departure.
Thank you.
Wonderful shows.
Thank you.
But that took a lot of nerve, huh?
Yeah, but I'm in the I have nothing to lose category of life, so there was no reason not to. And so I don't know about nerve, although I did make a few paintings that said, "If I only had the nerve." And
what's that come from?
The Cowardly Lion and The Wizard of Oz. So, I didn't have anything to lose. I had no reason not to. I was never going to be Andy Warhol my whole life. So I really just wanted to keep making work that was content rich. And I had a feeling it would have something to do with lyrics. I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
The first one I did on paper said, "Sing Out Louise." So I knew I knew where I was going. I just had no idea what it would look like.
Which is Gypsy Rose Lee, right?
That's the first line uttered by Mama Rose in Gypsy.
Well, what I see tying these two extremely diverse groups of work together is that they are all really kind of autobiographical. Both series. The ones when you started doing the Warhol Project, which, you had done other work before that, work that I'm not as familiar with, the landscape paintings, and then there were the history paintings. But for me, when you really got into this role was with the Warhol Project things, and there was so much personal content in them because they really spoke to your experience growing up Jewish in Long Island.
Well, the first part, first of all, I didn't know I was doing something called the Warhol Project. That, I just was making these, how do I say this? It wasn't a big plan to do that. And the part that you're referring to were the Barbaras and then the Yentls,
right,
which were made in '92. The project then continued without Barbara in drag or Barbara's profile after that. So the Jewish girl from Long Island part was the beginning of it. Mm-hmm. And then it was definitely personal, and definitely that's all there. But it had a specific relationship to all the other work I thought that was being done all the other work being done then that I thought was interesting, which was identity-based. And there was just a few identities that were severely missing that I happened to be. So, as usual, women are always missing.
Right.
So that's number one, because we're missing from most of the discourse of art history, as we all know. And then this Jewish thing, which, since I was so involved with queerness and blackness and other stuff that it just seemed to me that there was this gaping hole that was Jewishness, which I thought was kind of needed to be filled. But I think it's pretty clear that that was the big core of Jewishness, was that work. Now, since then, I always make a point.
But it was feminist also.
It's always feminist first.
Right.
It's always feminist first. Anyway, it's complicated. But yes, it's always feminist first. Because that's the thing that I chose.
Or that chose you.
No, I chose it. You don't choose to be born. I didn't choose to be a woman. I came out that way.
Right.
I chose to be a feminist. I didn't choose to be Jewish. I came out that way. And what's the feminist version of a Jew? I don't even know. That sounds like a joke. I don't know the answer. But it's like, there's what you are, which is not particularly interesting to me, versus who you are, which is much more interesting because it's a much more active relationship to the world. The I'm this and I'm that and identity and this and that, it gets really tired fast, I think. It's much more interested what you identify with in the world because it's an active thing. It's actually a verb. It's not a noun. And that's more interesting to me. So the reason I was doing all those Broadway songs and stuff was like, this was stuff like at various times in my life I thought really interested me. They were somehow how I came to define myself, like looking at Barbra Streisand at 12 years old or 13. I went, it wasn't her identity, it was my identification with her. It was my actively going, I love old movies. I love Hollywood. And I've never seen a girl look like this. Mm-hmm. Wow, she looks like everyone I know. That was kind of a big deal. So I could see part of myself out there in the world for the first time in this kind of incredibly glamorous way. That was
strong.
She was incredible. She was utterly radical. She still is.
And you actually addressed the Jewishness before you even did the Jewish Jackie series. You did the painting where you appropriated the nose job.
True. But I thought I was making a feminist painting, and I made the painting. Mm-hmm. And then I went, because really when I made this painting, do you remember the book, the Colette Dowling book in the 70s called The Cinderella Complex?
No.
It was a big feminist crossover bestseller book. So the height of second wave feminism, this was a book that she was interviewed in everywhere. She was on TV all the time. It was a big book, and it was the Cinderella Complex. So I truly thought I was making a feminist painting. And then I made the painting, and then I looked at the painting, and it was, I made a Jewish painting. I didn't really realize it was a Jewish princess. I just thought, this is, it's just one of those things. The painting really came first.
Were you one of those classic red diaper babies?
No, and we weren't that interesting either. We were just really suburban. I mean, my mother had great politics. It was her best contribution to me. But no, they weren't interesting in that way. They were more interesting culturally. Like, my mother was a fantastically well-read, very political, and knew absolutely everything about Hollywood and old Hollywood. Mm. My father was a dentist who absolutely hated his job, who played the sax nonstop, basically till a point he just did stop. But he had this incredibly encyclopedic knowledge and collection of every jazz recording ever made. So music was like a really big part of my consciousness. And so was politics.
When I was looking at, who you've shown with in this whole thing, I realized it's like this amazing, you started with Baskerville and Watson, the fabulous Simon Watson. What did the Baskerville come from?
Lou Baskerville.
Oh, I didn't know Lou Baskerville.
They were boyfriends.
Oh,
they both went to Williams, and they started the gallery together.
So, I mean, this is a pretty dynamic start. I mean, you're like starting at the top, basically.
Well, it wasn't at the top yet. I was their second show.
Oh.
So it's not like they started at the top. Do you know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's like they were just figuring it out.
The incredible eye.
They had an incredible eye. They had an incredibly good advisor in Caroline Clonaridis, who came on right after me, and I had been on the Whitney program with her where we were really tiny little kids. Mm. And she and they shaped that incredibly good program. And they actually, I don't know why, they don't seem to get the credit they really should have, considering who they represented. I mean, Richard Prince, Carol Dunham, Sherry Levine, me, Ronnie Fisher. I'm just off the top of my head. I mean, it was a great gallery for a while.
And now, this year, you did a big show here at Paul Gassman of My Elvis of the Yentels.
Yes.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very dignified, wasn't it?
Very.
I know. It was so serious. I mean, it looked so serious in that space. I knew once they built that space, I wanted to show in it, but when we figured out to do the Yentels, and then plus, in the back were some self-portraits. You know, it was all Yentels in the front. And then in the back was this one and the whole big wall of me like this, like Andy, portrait of the artist as a young man.
And camouflage?
And one camouflage, and then the really psycho altered image photo. That's really sick. Twisted. Very twisted photo.
But this one of you as Liz is amazing.
Thank you. That's my parting shot to Andy. That was the last one in 2000. So I thought it was a great way to go out.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the first one where I'm not Andy, for one thing.
Right.
Even though I'm still an Andy.
You know, what I find so compelling in your work is that you're dealing with these very heated, heavy topics of ethnicity and gender, power, sexuality, class. I mean, you get like the whole thing, but yet you don't feel hit over the head with these paintings. I feel that maybe it's because you're a woman or whatever, but you've added a warmness to this and a very personal. They become very personal.
I don't know that they're so personal, but they are very heated. And I did very consciously take pop and appropriation, which are historically cool ideas, and I specifically did want to invest them with heat. And I was also coming from I'm a painter. So the idea of even dealing with race, class, ethnicity, and gender in painting was really not something that was particularly being done. And it looked like the only way you could do that was to make a photograph. So it was really important to me to take the lessons of the 80s, which to me were about Barbara Kruger, Sherry Levine, and Cindy Sherman, and everything that means, and somehow take that information and put it back into the history of painting. So it was not... So I wanted to be able to make a painting that was about class and feminism and all the things I loved about Barbara Kruger. Okay, and I wanted to be able to make paintings still. And that was also, people don't remember, a very contested thing at that point, because, I mean, what it meant was for the October people who like photography, they were never going to like my work because it was painted. And for painting people, they had issues with, painting was still sort of, it has somehow managed to avoid any of that conversation that really was the most important conversation going on in art, critical art of the late 80s, and somehow painting was exempt. Its parameters, its borders were patrolled by ideas of greatness, history, whiteness, and maleness. And those borders were impermeable. So to bring in any of those issues into a painting was something you just simply didn't do. Of course, I had to do it. I had to. And as in the 70s, when the most important influences on me were women painters, and it was Elizabeth Murray and Mary Heilman and Pat Steer and several others, in the 80s, my influences were really Barbara Kruger, Cindy Sherman, and Sherry Levine. I showed with Sherry. She blew my mind. Barbara Kruger's, it's very simple. Sherry did the appropriation, the cold, cool, aloof, October appropriation. Barbara Kruger did the politics of power, which honestly influenced me the most. And then Cindy did the performativity. And I wanted all that in my painting. So when I came up with the Barbra Streisand thing, which was the first Andy thing I came up with, after the art history paintings, it was, I'm going to make these, this is painting. This is painting. This is multiculturalism for people who don't want to even think about it. Gay men and Jewish women. No, that's not true. To take that out. No, you can leave that in. Anyway, I knew I was doing something complicated. And I knew the audiences. I knew exactly who my audience would be when I did it. And they were people like me, basically. And that sort of led to everything else. So, yeah, I did get all that stuff into painting.
I mean, it was a real
but I don't
OMG moment, right? When you, it must have felt that way. All of a sudden, when you visualize like Barbra Streisand.
There they were. I mean, I learned how to silkscreen. Somebody showed me in their shower how to clean it, how to do it. I had a silkscreen made. I did it. I hair dried them, and I made them, a lot of them, and I made 5 in a weekend. And I called Simon up, and I went, you really have to come over here. And he came over, and he was like, I want to show these. And it was just kind of like, it was instant. The minute I did it, I was like, oh my God. And I had the title before I did the painting.
The Jewish Jackie.
Yeah. And I had the title My Elvis before I did the Yentles. I'm glad you can see all that stuff. But really, it was a very dry time if you were interested in issues of power, which was exactly why I spent 3 days at the Black Popular Culture Conference at the Studio Museum and the New Museum, because these people were, talking about power, how power is constructed, how power is accumulated, how it is policed, how it's used. It was a completely fabulous 3 days of my life. It was fantastic. And I was like, I've got to get this into my work. This is really what I care about. This is totally what I care about. Systems of power. And of course, the history of painting goes right into that. Because who makes paintings, what's valuable about them, what they're saying, what does it look like, what's in the painting, what does that painting say about women, who is that naked person, why are all the great artists men, why did Linda Nochlin write that wonderful essay in 1972 that blew us all out of the water?
And then you did Linda Nochlin.
Then I did Orange Disaster, Linda Nochlin. No, this is about my heroes too. I mean, I did Cindy, I did Pat Steer, I did Elizabeth Murray, I did Linda Nochlin, a lot of people post. It was really good.
So when you went to the Whitney Independent Study Program, a lot of theory, right? Who was
not in 1972.
Oh, no?
That theory hadn't been invented yet. Identity had not been invented yet. Deconstruction was nowhere to be found. I used to always say, I went to the Whitney program when Ron Clark was a Marxist. That was it. There was no theory as we know it, any more than there was when we went to school. Was there any theory? Did you learn feminism?
No.
It didn't exist in 1972.
I guess not on a campus, but certainly in real life. I mean, in the 70s,
yes,
feminism was a very, very strong.
Well, it really was, because when I came to New York in the 70s, the best painters were definitely women, and everyone seemed to know it. And I didn't see anything close to an issue, because the greatest artists were women painters, as far as I could tell. But then the 80s happened, which was a completely different animal.
I mean, Paula Cooper was showing, I remember coming and going to Paula Cooper and being amazed with the fabulous women. Jackie Windsor, who I thought was incredible.
Yeah. No, it was thrilling.
And Linda Benglis.
Fabulous.
Fabulous.
Fabulous. And Elizabeth Murray, who changed my life. And Mary Heilman. I remember Mary's first show vividly at Holly Solomon. I mean, these were really important people. Joan Snyder, really important artist. And, but there was not the money that entered the art world during Reagan at that point. And the art world was a very different business and place than it became in the 80s.
Well, also, as we're talking, it occurs to me, these were women dealers that were supporting these artists. Paula Cooper, Holly Solomon. Mm-hmm. And you've shown only with male dealers. How did that happen?
Women didn't want me. It's really simple.
Too threatening.
It's not for me to say. It's not for me to say. I don't know. I mean, I really would love to show with a woman. It never worked out that way. So, this was a big jump for me. It was a straight man. like, wow. But, wasn't my choice. So, women dealers have notoriously excluded women. Like back in the day when Mary Boone didn't have women for years.
Right.
Power is power. If you want power, you go for power. Period. Showing women isn't the best business model in the world. It's a little better right now, but only a little. Not much, really. I don't think the statistics are any better now than they were in the 80s either. I mean, I am not and have never been a guerrilla girl, but we all knew the statistics because they were all over the place.
Right.
I don't think they're any different now. They're certainly not different at the auctions. So I don't think what the art world has become now is a completely different creature than it was in the 70s. And what it is now started with the men of my generation. So, as you know. So, it's become
You mean this whole market mania that's going on now?
Frankly, I just blame the Republicans, so.
That's easy.
It's not, it's supply side economics. It's the difference between rich and poor people. That it's really a Republican economic theory. It's Milton Friedman that started all this, and Reagan, who came in to the White House carrying a copy of Milton Friedman's theory of neoliberalism and supply side economics. And we're living with it on every level. The art world is just another, as it always is, it's just another symptom. Painting was just another symptom of white male domination.
But I sense in your work this authenticity. I know people, hate that word, but
I love that word.
That comes from a place where an artist is doing something that means something to them. It's not like they're coming up with some theory and like creating what they think every critic out there is going to want to see, or every person who walks into a booth at an art fair is going to say, oh, I think I understand this, and this is like,
of course,
and I see a lot of that out there, like dry,
Well, and then there's the incredibly decorative abstract painters who are really good with materials. I mean, you see it all. There's this whole thing. But what you're saying is if you are actually thinking politically, then one would assume you're making dry work.
Right.
Which
but
I guess
play
is
against
true.
the mold anyway. Like how many lesbians does it take to change a light bulb? That's not funny.
Well, I remember that one. Well, but that's why, that's why being identified as a Jewish lesbian in the first sentence of absolutely everything that's ever written about me is so utterly irritating.
Well, first of all, I read that and I kept thinking, I really don't, I see the feminist part of it like right off. That's like, whoa, right there. But, how do they know you're a lesbian? I don't really understand the lesbian.
It's a barometer of the culture's uncomfort with lesbians. That's all it is.
They certainly never talked about Jasper Johns or Rauschenberg or people.
Why don't we just talk about people who are really big right now, who they never get mentioned? Of course, well, they're men. They're men, so it never gets mentioned because that might affect their market. And I'm a woman, and it gets mentioned immediately because it makes people nervous, and it'll affect my market.
Oh, it's more titillating when you're a lesbian than being gay.
No, it's not.
No?
It's more acceptable to be a gay man because it's more acceptable to be a man. And as I like to say, when a gay man does your hair, do you have gay hair? And when a gay man does your decorating, do you have gay decorating? And that's how being a lesbian should be. Really, it's absurd. It's absurd. But other people have mentioned the fact that my work crosses so many boundaries in terms of identity, another word I loathe, that you know, I mean, I always thought when I made the Barbra Streisand paintings, I was kind of like, well, when I made all the Andy stuff, I was going like, well, I'm so many things in this. Does that mean I'll finally get out of the Jewish ghetto? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But it didn't mean that. It didn't mean that. I thought if you're in 3 small ghettos, does that mean you're automatically out of ghettos? No.
Can you talk a little bit about Vincent Fremont, who is your manager, when that started, how you met up, if it had to do with the Warhol thing?
Yeah, it did have to do with the Warhol thing because first of all, we have a lot of friends in common. So, but I met him on a panel about Warhol in like Art Chicago, maybe in 97 or 6 or 8 or something like that. And Sotheby's put it together, and Robert Rosenblum was on it, and Vincent was on it, Tom Sachs, Lisa Liebman.
Lisa, who writes in your catalog also.
And anyway, I think that's when I met him. I can't remember exactly. But then I would see him around a lot, and then we started being on Warhol panels together. So this was a panel about Warhol. And then I think he suggested me for a panel about Warhol somewhere else, like in New Pulse or something. I can't remember. So it was all through the Andy thing. Mm-hmm. And then when I would see him at a party of our mutual friends, I knew it was Vincent, so then we started talking. And I rented one summer in Provincetown, and John Waters lived above me. And Vincent and Shelley came to visit John. Like, these are all the things, and then it all got put together after. Like, oh, I met you then, I met you then, I met you then. But I did kind of know him better in 2001 when I rented that place. And anyway, to make a long story short, then I really knew him from the Warhol stuff, and we would see each other at parties. And one day, I'd had a lot of people to my studio looking for a gallery. And I wasn't looking for a gallery when I said to Vincent, why don't you come over? I'm not being Andy Warhol anymore. Mm-hmm. Like, that's what I said. And he said, well, I'd love to. So he came over, and he turned to me and said, well, what if I brought Paul Kasman over? I said, that would be great. So Paul came over, and within 2 minutes, you know, like really within a week, I had a gallery after looking and looking and looking and being turned down. Mm-hmm. Then I turned to Vincent and said, well, this is amazing. What can I do? Can I give you a painting? Can I give you a drawing? What can I do for you? And he said, I want to represent you with Paul. So.
And had he ever done that with anybody before?
Yes, he had. He had worked with Julian Schnabel.
Oh.
He works now with Bridget Berlin. But aside from that, no. So he had, but it's not what he does. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not his job. So that's how that worked out. And I couldn't believe it because I used to live with a literary agent, and I was always like, we need an agent. Like, artists need agents because they're the thing between the publisher and the artist and the writer, and they negotiate and they do the deals and all that kind of stuff, and it's legal and there are contracts and all that. So we don't have that in the art world, but I do have Vincent. So that's how it worked out, and now 7 years later, it's worked out really well.
It's great.
Yeah, I feel very lucky with Paul, and very lucky and so grateful to Vincent.
So let's talk about what you're working on now. What's in the studio?
So now that it's been like a year ago was my retrospective, and then in January, February.
A lot. You had a lot happen.
I had a lot going on.
You had the retrospective at the Warhol Museum, and then you had the My Elvis show here.
Then I had the My Elvis show.
Simultaneously, right?
Yes. And I would say that the last 7 years have been completely, utterly, totally intense. Mm. And I kind of have been recuperating. I have managed to make some work. And I'm once there's construction going on the roof of my building, but you know, once that's all settled, basically in the new year, you know, I'm really just making more work. I'm still involved in times are still bad. We need to feel good. Mm-hmm. So I'm still making feel-good paintings and sculpture.
And sculpture?
Well, yeah, I have the neon.
Oh, you have the yo and the...
I have the yo oi. And actually, I'm experimenting with some stuff in my studio. Really, that's a continuation of this work. And a lot of what I've been doing this year in my studio is kind of elaborating on other paintings I made but didn't have a chance to do more with. I didn't have a chance to do them in different colors or slightly different kind of text, these things, font, or, hand done versus stencils versus fonts. And so I got to elaborate on stuff that I've made before, but I wanted to make differently. And that's what leads to the next work.
Yeah, when you come off such an incredible high
of
having these like two amazing shows, then it must be a really good point to go, and scary time to go into the studio and face the blank canvases. And
yeah, I was talking to someone who has a retrospective up now, and she was saying, I just feel like I can do anything I want now. And she also said, I think people have like their best shows right after their retrospectives. And I thought, oh, that would be so cool to have my best show after my retrospective. But I mean, basically,
is there a show planned?
Yeah, I'm going to have a show in spring 15. But I'm talking to someone in Zurich, and there's other possibilities in other places, but here will definitely be then. And I really just miss being engaged in my studio, because that's really, I figured out it's the thing that slows time down, is when I'm really working. It's just like time has a different feel. It doesn't go so fast when I'm engaged in every second. So I can't wait. I can't wait to just have the thing filled up. Also, I like to work on a lot at once because it's really good for ADD. Like there's always something to do on a different painting. So my best time is when 4 or 5 things are going on. So I'm always busy. Like the hands never stop.
Yeah.
And I just kind of can't wait.
I can't wait too. I can't wait until the next.
Thank you.
Wait until 2015. And thank you. This was fabulous.
Okay, good. I'm glad you. I hope you got what you. I hope it's good.